like to welcome everyone to Gettysburg National Military Park and to tonight's evening campfire program. And just a few quick details before we actually jump in. This program will take about 30 to 40 minutes, give or take. We'll have stage lights on at all times, so don't be afraid that it'll get too dark for you. Looking at the Battle of Gettysburg, most of you have visited the visitor center, gone and traveled the battlefield, maybe even attended some of the programs. And as you know, the battle encompassed July 1st through 3rd, 1863. Now, after those 3 days of intense fighting, 51,000 casualties would remain here. You have roughly between 7,000 and 10,000 dead scattered upon the fields, over 20,000 wounded soldiers scattered through homes, hospitals, barns, fields, etc. People would return to Gettysburg, or people would arrive at Gettysburg right after the battle. You had doctors, nurses coming down to treat these wounded men. You had scavengers coming across the battlefield looking for items, relics of this great event. You had families returning to the area because possibly a loved one had lost their life or was injured, and they wanted to come and claim that individual, take them back home. But you had someone else that arrived. John Batchelder would arrive shortly after the battle, a landscape painter from New Hampshire, and this gentleman would come down to Gettysburg and witness firsthand the aftermath. He would come down and he would interview hundreds of veterans that fought here, that participated in the battle. He gathered their stories. He took in the field. He sketched images of this area. But the one thing that he did not do was he did not interview any civilians. Specifically, he did not interview any of the students at Gettysburg College. They were almost participants in the battle themselves. He would return and he would write the history of the Battle of Gettysburg from the point of view from the veterans. But what would have happened if he spoke to those civilians, to those college students, and got their stories? How might his history of the Battle of Gettysburg been changed? Well, tonight, hopefully, we will find out. We will find out what would have happened had John Batchelder interviewed some of the students of what was then Pennsylvania College. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you battle studies.
Scarcely had the booming of cannons and the rattling of musketry ceased, then did anxious crowds of visitors begin swarming the town of Gettysburg and the surrounding hills and valleys, which had so recently been the scene of death and slaughter.
Many came to search for fathers, brothers, husbands, or other dear family members and relatives.
If yet living, to administer to their wants, to alleviate their sufferings, or to perform some other acts which affection dictated.
Or, if in death, to remove their mortal remains to a family burial ground as a final resting place,
where they should be able to call upon their memory and look back at their good virtues and noble deeds.
It was sad to witness
Every day,
the manifestations of almost inconsolable grief.
When wife or mother realized their worst fears,
gazing upon the mangled form of a loved one placed before her eyes,
and being assured that those lips, which had often spoken words of kindness to her face, were forever sealed in death.
After graduating from Pennsylvania College in 1850, I left Gettysburg. I returned home to my native Virginia. I became a lawyer. But in 1861, my state changed and I followed a call. You remember the profound interest and emotion of that hour. It stifled all light feelings and gave to each eye a thoughtful rise, and to each eye a depth of light, which comes only when the heart is weighed with heavy emotion. All knew when at long last that long roll sounded, it would thrill the land, and it would not cease to be heard, neither day nor night, until silenced in victory or defeat. Comrades, is it still a dream? Sometimes to me, and doubtless sometimes to you, absorbed and environed as we are by the present, the war seems a mystical and mysterious thing. If in those of us who were its active participants, it must be this way, then what must it be in those who are taking our places? It's here that I'd like to share with you a story not wholly irrelevant nor inopportune. As I said, I graduated in 1850. I had the distinct honor of being valedictorian of my college class. Now, in my address to my classmates, I took great notice of the ongoing debate in the Congress on the bill to admit California as a state into the Union. Great sectional feeling was aroused during this long and protracted discussion, and one senator dared use the word disunion as a threat. The very word sent a thrill of horror all throughout the land. I recall my own feelings of horror. In my address to my classmates, I alluded to this sectional feeling, deprecating it, and exclaiming, "Who knows, unless patriotism should triumph over sectionalism, but what we classmates may someday meet in future battle array." Now, Dr. Barker, as president of the college, had final revision over our addresses to our classmates, and thus he struck this line out of my address. But alas, it was prophetic conjecture, as classmates of ours did meet in future years, not only in battle array, but on the same fields over which, in studying botany, Professor Jacobs had led us in the study of the wild flowers that adorn those fields.
Look at that!
Are you sure we should be up here?
There's soldiers all over McPherson's farm.
Shouldn't we have permission to be here?
The professors can go to grass. This is bigger than Greek. This is a battle.
This is dangerous.
This is history. There's Union cavalry right out there.
Isn't that old man Burns down there? He's crazier than a loon. Anywhere he is, I don't want to be.
Oh, come off it. We're perfectly safe up here.
What was that?
Must have been a bird or something. The rebels. They're firing cannon now.
Cannon?
What was that?
Let's get out of here.
I remember it like it was yesterday, John. I mean, we were just about to have recitations. I was just about to stand up and recite all of last night's Greek lesson when federal soldiers knocked at the door of the college building.
Well, what did they want?
Were these soldiers? All they had were flags. They didn't have any guns with them. And they demanded to use the cupola. Well, Professor Barker, he would agree. He would let them use the cupola, and we would carry on class. Now, you can probably imagine our minds were on anything but the Greek lesson that day. Many of us fumbled and bumbled. We failed horribly at reciting our lines. We could hear the soldiers on the roof. We'd look out, try and picture the firing that we knew that was occurring outside of the college building. Finally, President Barker, he had had enough. He put us out of our misery, as well as his own, I guess. He'd shut his book, say, "We will close now and see what is going on, for you know nothing of the lesson anyhow." Well, after class was let out, I suggested to some of my friends, why don't we go to the seminary and to the cupola on top of the seminary and see if we can get a better view, as there were federal soldiers already in the cupola of the college edifice building.
Of course.
We climb up those ladders and stairs up into the top of the building. What we saw, both battle lines, the Union and rebel soldiers, full battle, firing at one another. We saw some of the first shots of the battle. We had heard and read about battle in the newspapers around town for 2 years. But now battle was on our doorstep. It had come to Gettysburg. Who wouldn't want to go see what battle was actually like? It was amazing. Now, pretty soon rebel artillery started to fire on the seminary and the Union artillery that was stationed there. We soon realized what battle really was. Dangerous. So we scrambled down, as that was just then all we desired to hear and see, a battle, and we ran back into town, fearing for our safety. Now I'd lose track of most of my classmates. I went back to the college edifice building, back to the campus. There were Union soldiers all over it. For the rest of the battle, I'd stay away from the campus and the town, as it soon became held in enemy hands.
It'll be fine, Mother. I'll just cross the yard, pick some berries, and I'll be right back presently. See, I just returned from Harrisburg, John.
Oh, wait, Harrisburg?
Yes. My grandmother lives in Harrisburg, and, well, when the rebels started invading, we thought it would be safest to get her away from their target. Everyone thought that the rebels were headed to the capital. So, we brought her back here where she'd be safe, in Gettysburg. Yeah. Well, some of my other relatives had the same exact idea. They were down in Greencastle. They came up here as well. So by the morning of July 1st, we pretty much had a full house. And that morning, Father, he was on the campus teaching when Union soldiers burst through the building and went up into the cupola. They told him, get your family and take them to your cellar. So he streamed back from the campus. He came to our house and he said we should get into safety. So we headed down into the cellar and we wait out the next 3 days of battle there. Of course, the problem with that, well, we operate sort of different in this town. We don't stock much food. The way we operate, if we need a loaf of bread, we go to the bakery. If we need a steak, we go down to the grocer.
Well, that's the same thing in my town, too.
All we had in the basement was half a barrel of old flour and a little bit of water. For 3 days, we ate off of that. Mother made biscuits, unleavened cakes. You know, it sounds really romantic in the book of Exodus in the Bible, with the Jews of old eating the unleavened bread. It's far less romantic when you have to do it for 3 days.
I believe it.
We quickly got tired of eating crusty flour. I decided I needed flavor. So I took my hat, I went up to the cellar doors, I threw them open, and I crawled across the backyard. We had a stockade fence in the back, and along it were pricker bushes with berries. I went out to pick those blackberries. I picked them off the bush, brought them back, and we had jam.
While you were out there, the firing could have started, though, at any time.
There were rebels right on the other side of the fence. We'd been watching them all day in the street. We could hear them out there. When we watched them that morning, they were sitting there reading their testaments or playing games. They were young kids, no older than me. As I sat out there in the yard picking those berries, I realized there wasn't much separating them from me. All the difference was I was wearing this coat. They had on a uniform. I was at home with my family, and they were alone, thousands of miles from their home.
Oh, can I help you, son?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, sir.
Thank you. You mind if we rest for a moment? Have a seat.
Thanks.
Now, how'd that happen to you?
To be honest, I wish I had a better answer for you. I got shot on the first stick. Last thing I really remember was being carried off the field into this little house, little white house right by the college campus.
A hospital.
It became one. It was actually where the president lived. Him and his family. So, like every building in town, it did become a hospital, though.
And you were treated by your surgeon.
I wouldn't say that. Fact of the matter is, sir, By that time, rebels had overrun that area. On the afternoon of the 1st, even through the 2nd and 3rd, Confederates were all around. Fact is that this man from Texas, I believe, Confederate surgeon, looked right at me, saw my wound was pretty high up on the leg, to say the least of things. He basically said I was dead. Said it was knocking on death's doorstep and that there weren't no use operating on me.
So how are you still here today?
I think she had something to do with it, sir.
Who?
Alice, the president's daughter. She took care of me. After that rebel surgeon said I was going to die, she said that I was stronger than that. Fact is, she watched after me the whole battle. Tell you what, every time I would come out of consciousness, I would wake up and I would see her just hovering over top of me. Just like an angel. Every time. In fact, during part of the battle, we could hear shells clattering against the side of the house there. Every time I woke up during those moments there, her and her father would be hovering over my body, using their bodies as shields. They even left the house during the battle to go get a lot of hay to make beds for the rest of everybody.
Oh, there were other people there.
You could say that, sir. There were close to 20. Fact is, 20 of these boys in one house, a lot for one family to take care of. One of the men was actually a First Corps officer, second lieutenant, an adjutant for the First Corps, Mr. David Weaver, Lieutenant Weaver. And I'll tell you what they did a majority of 3 days. They were hiding him all over the place. Alice said they'd hide him anywhere they could, say in cabinets, under a table. In fact, they were one of the first houses to have a water closet in town here. I'm not sure where they actually hid him, but Alice was saying they were doing it every single time that these rebels walked through the door.
Now, why'd they have to hide him?
Well, the fact is, if he'd been captured, sir, he wouldn't have been sent to a hospital. He would have been sent directly to a prison. And on top of that, you don't come back from a prison, especially if you're a wounded officer. I think it also had something to do with Professor Bakker's son.
Oh, he had a son.
From what I hear, his name was Nesbitt. And I guess what happened after he graduated from Pennsylvania College, he moved out west, out towards Illinois. Ended up joining up out there, fighting through Illinois and on the Western Front. And I guess he was down at Shiloh when he met his demise. He got shot over enemy lines, and his men did the same thing for him. What they did, he was over these lines, so everyone kind of pushed forward there and tried to get his body back. They dragged him back, and from what I understand, Professor Bakker made it back just in the nick of time. He said he got out there to see his son, pray with him as he was dying. He said that he was paying it forward. He said he was going to take care of that Mr. Weaver like those people had taken care of his son. But that wasn't even the worst part, sir. The worst injustice came on the second. And I'll tell you what, Alice was right there in the hallway, tending to some of these other boys, and General Robert E. Lee himself walked right through the front door. And Alice just froze right there. There he was. And the look that came over her face was just such disdain. She looked at him like he was personally the one who had killed her brother, as if he was directly responsible for his death. But you know, in some way, I guess he was.
Can you tell me a little bit about the third day?
The morning of the third day was relatively quiet. We'd actually gone upstairs to gather some things so we'd be a little bit more comfortable. Father grabbed his thermometer and his barometer. He's a scientist after all, he can't keep his hands still. It was about 80 degrees in the morning. Started climbing as the day went on. There was full cloud cover. But by noon, it looked like it might burn off, like we might get some sunshine. At 1:07 precisely, by Father's watch, a great roar started south of town. Cannons were firing again, and we all retreated back to the basement. The women of the household, they could swear they could tell the difference between the rebel guns and our guns. And they sat there and said, ours, theirs, ours, theirs.
I get the picture.
For 2 hours it went on. Finally, it stopped. It was silent. And Father couldn't be kept still. He wanted to go. He wanted to see what was happening. So he ran up the stairs. He went up to the second floor of the house. He went up to the attic. He climbed out onto the roof. And pretty soon, I heard my name being shouted down through the house. Henry, Henry, come quick. You must see this. There's something you will never see again in your life. So I climbed the stairs. I went up to the attic. I went out onto the roof. And there, south of town, in the fields, a long gray line of men was emerging from the woods. And it started crossing. As it got halfway across to a low wooden fence, the men started to climb it, and a great plume of smoke erupted from our lines. The gray line charged forward. They struck our men. Just a minute or two later, they staggered back in pieces. Broken flags, broken men. We'd won. We'd pushed the rebels back. The battle was over. Our boys were victorious. And just then, my father and I were standing on that roof, just then, it started to rain. For the first time in 3 days, it started to rain. And it was a cool rain. It was a clean rain. It was a cleansing rain. It was as if it was washing something away. Like it was washing something evil away.
Now you see, John, even though I'd stay away from the campus and the town, I still couldn't escape the battle. I'd stay south of town with some of the families I knew. Well, one family, their house was turned into a makeshift hospital. First, they started to bring the wounded soldiers in, 1, 2, then a couple, and then dozens. There was only a couple of surgeons there to tend to all the wounded men. So I helped pitch in and helped to care for some of the wounded soldiers. I bandaged some of their wounds. I'd let them take sips of water and feed them some food. The men I cared for, they started to call me doctor.
Doctor, huh? That's a heck of a promotion from student.
Yes, but that's what I was doing. There was no class. I was acting as these men's doctors. Now, I can't remember really when I got back to campus. I think it was Monday, July 6th. What greeted me, it was horrific. Where just last week we had held classes, Greek recitations. Now was one massive field hospital. Someone said over 700 rebels were lying in the fields and the buildings of the campus. My own room had ample accommodations for 3. One was in my bed, and then 2 more were on my floor. Now, when I got in my room, that was the only thing that was there. Those 3 wounded rebels. My possessions were gone. My books, my clothing, my trunks, it was all gone.
Well, what happened to him?
I figured they had been stolen, also become casualties of war. I asked about the wounded soldiers in my room. They directed me to this rebel lieutenant. The lieutenant told me what happened on July 1st. He said the first rebels that got to the college building, all the rooms that were unlocked, all the students who'd left their rooms unlocked, the rebels went in. They collected all those students' belongings. They gathered them up. They put them in the president's room, the president's office, and they locked that door. They put a guard out there for the rest of the battle. Now the students that didn't have their rooms unlocked, the students that had locked their rooms, well, the soldiers couldn't collect up their possessions.
So what happened to their stuff?
Subsequent rebels that came to the college would break into those rooms and they would steal those possessions. Now, the college was used as a hospital for so long, I really can't remember how long it was. The fact was that the week after the battle, that was supposed to be our last week of classes. We were gearing up for final examinations and then for commencement the first week of August, when we were supposed to be studying for our exams. We were caring for wounded soldiers in the college building. I still remember their moans, their shrieks, their prayers. Only a heart dispossessed of all humanity couldn't lend a hand. Now, when the time for commencement finally came, the faculty and staff, they held a meeting. They conferred upon us the usual degrees. That is when I received my degree. I figure, they figured, we had already suffered enough.
It was during the charge of Pickett's division at the Battle of Gettysburg in which I was wounded and taken prisoner. Needless to say, after of which, along with myself, some others were taken to a 12th Corps hospital situated near the rear battle line of the Federals. Much to my surprise, I was greeted here with much kindness and consideration. Needless to say, while at the hospital there, I ran into one professor from the college, Professor Stouffer. We had a talk of the old college days, even as I still wore a tattered battle gray suit. Of course, after this, it occurred to me, perhaps I should try and make myself a better appearance. And thus, I inquired with the authorities at the hospital about getting a pass to go into the town of Gettysburg. And it was here that the authorities of the hospital conferred on me a great honor. They gave me a free pass into Gettysburg, on the sole condition that I have it countersigned at the provost's office. I went alone, completely unattended. The woods and fields were open to me. But yet they knew, somehow, I know not how, that my honor was more important to me than my life. I wasn't going to run. Now, on my way to town, I learned the fate of General Armistead. Saw his freshly made grave, paid my respects, and headed on into the provost's office. I had my pass countersigned, and the town of Gettysburg was free to me. I could go anywhere. Let me just say, it was a queer sight to see a rebel lieutenant mingling amidst a crowd of civilians, even while there was still plenty of Union officers and soldiers all around the town. But yet every one of these men could see that all the town's principal citizens were coming up to me, warmly greeting me and shaking me by the hand. I felt at home. The funny thing is, I'd become that rebel in that crowd there. Now, in that crowd, mingling among some old friends, I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder. I turned to look, and there was my old professor of mathematics, Professor Jacobs. He leaned into me and with the quietest consideration said, "Don't talk about the war." Needless to say, I wholeheartedly admired his kindness and consideration. But the fact had been I had not been talking about the war. War was completely forgotten in talk of old college days. It's here that I'd like to share with you one other story. While on the college campus, I met a certain son of Professor Barker, who was then the college president, as he was when I graduated. Now, this son gave me such a cordial invitation to dine with him and his father that evening that I could hardly decline. And thus I went. I walked into his home. I sat down at his table, and there was Professor Barker. Now, I detected in him a slight reserved dignity. It was natural of him to be so, and thus I admired him for it. The old professor was a very positive but radical character, thoroughly orthodox in his Lutheran faith. But I dare say he had probably aligned himself with such radicals on abolition like Thaddeus Stevens, people along those lines. Needless to say, it left me no need to be told that his views with this war were intense. And yet there he was, break-in bread with a red-handed rebel, a lieutenant, a second lieutenant adjutant for the Army of the Confederacy. He was given aid and comfort to his enemy. I know not how, but he kept mastery of himself. The old professor saw not a gray suit, but saw his old student. Saw not the war that was going on, but talked of old memories. If there was anything between his heart and his country's loss, there was nothing between his heart and his Savior's sweet charity.
Well, here in town these past few weeks, I've heard from students and citizens, but like every soldier who fought here at Gettysburg, everyone in the town seems to have their own story to tell, especially of those 3 horrible days earlier this July. Standing where I am and looking at the college in this light makes me think. Through stories, we can see how people relate to one another.
They relay our hopes and our dreams,
Our beliefs.
And our fears.
But in a real sense, stories make people. Tonight it's important to remember that we all have a story inside us. It's those that we share, that we remember, that we pass on, that define us. In today's modern day society, sometimes we forget to live day to day and never look back. But our history is what got us here. Our stories. What are yours? With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for coming out tonight and viewing our performance, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your stay here in Gettysburg.